The champagne glass felt cold against my palm as I stood in the center of the crystal ballroom, surrounded by 300 of the city's most powerful people. The chandeliers sparkled overhead like 1,000 judging eyes. My husband, Alexander Knight, stood 20 feet away at the podium, his smile wide and confident as he accepted the Businessman of the Year award. His mistress, Victoria Hayes, sat in the front row, cradling a 6-month-old baby boy. My baby boy. Or so everyone had believed for the past 6 months. And I want to thank my beautiful wife, Isabelle, Alexander said, gesturing toward me, for her unwavering support through everything. I smiled. I had practiced that smile in the mirror for 3 months, perfecting the curve of my lips, the warmth in my eyes, the tilt of my head that suggested pride and devotion. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs like a prisoner, demanding freedom. But no one would see that. No one would know. I raised my glass in acknowledgement. Around me, people clapped. They had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, their golden boy would fall from grace so spectacularly that this night would be discussed in boardrooms and country clubs for decades. Victoria caught my eye. She smiled too. That victorious little smirk that said she thought she had won. She held the baby Christopher. She called him a little higher, as if to remind me that she had given Alexander something I supposedly couldn't. I took a sip of champagne and let the bubbles dance on my tongue. Poor Victoria. She had no idea what was coming. The thing about success, Alexander continued, his voice booming through the sound system, is that it requires sacrifice. Hard choices. Sometimes we have to put our personal desires aside for the greater good. I almost laughed. The irony was delicious. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Right on time. I glanced at it discreetly. The message read, "Everything is ready. Your move." I set down my champagne glass and began walking toward the stage. My heels clicked against the marble floor with measured precision. Every eye in the room followed me. I had timed this perfectly. Interrupting his speech would create maximum impact, maximum attention, maximum witnesses. "Darling," I called out sweetly as I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's something I need to share with everyone." Alexander's smile flickered. Just for a moment, I saw confusion flash across his face. Then concern. Then something that might have been fear. "Isabelle, this isn't really the time, oh, but it is," I said, taking the microphone from his hand with gentle firmness. "You see, everyone here tonight thinks they know Alexander Knight, successful businessman, philanthropist, devoted husband." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But there's something you should all know. Something about the beautiful baby boy that Victoria Hayes has been showing off for the past 6 months." Victoria's face went pale. She clutched Christopher tighter. "That child," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "is not my husband's son." The room erupted in whispers. Alexander grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" I looked at him then. Really looked at him. And let him see past my mask for just a moment. Let him see the cold fury that had been building since the day I discovered his betrayal. "I'm telling the truth," I said quietly, "just for him. Something you should have tried. 3 months earlier, I had been a different woman. Or maybe I had been the same woman, just blind to the truth. I remembered that Tuesday morning perfectly. The sky had been gray, promising rain. I had been in Alexander's home office, looking for the insurance documents for my car. He had told me they were in the filing cabinet, 2nd drawer from the top. That's where I found the DNA test results instead. My hands had trembled as I read the words. Probability of paternity, 0%. Alexander Knight is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The paper had been dated 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks that Alexander had said nothing. 2 weeks that he had continued his affair with Victoria, continued the lie, continued to let me believe that the baby she claimed was his actually belonged to him. I had sat in his leather chair for over an hour, staring at those papers. My mind raced through the past year. Victoria Hayes, his beautiful business partner, who had joined Knight Industries 18 months ago. The late nights, the business trips, the way he had started coming home, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Then 6 months ago, Victoria had announced she was pregnant. Alexander had seemed shocked but had accepted responsibility immediately. He had promised to end things with her but wanted to support the child. He had asked me to stand by him, to help him through this difficult time. He had cried. I had cried. We had sat in our bedroom, and I had held his hand while he told me how sorry he was, how it had been a mistake, how he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I had believed him. I had stood beside him as he announced to the board that he would be supporting Victoria and the baby. I had smiled through the whispers and the pitying looks. I had played the role of the understanding wife, the woman who chose her marriage over her pride. And the entire time, he had known the baby wasn't his. I had taken pictures of the DNA test with my phone. Then I had carefully returned everything to exactly where I had found it. I had walked out of his office, gone upstairs to our bedroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me had looked tired, defeated, betrayed. But as I stood there, something had shifted inside me. The hurt had crystallized into something harder, sharper. Alexander thought I was weak. He thought I would continue to play along with whatever game he and Victoria were running. He had no idea what I was capable of. I had picked up my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Kenneth Walsh, a man Alexander had introduced me 2 years ago, never suspecting we would become genuine friends. The second was to Patricia Montgomery, a private investigator I had found online with excellent reviews. The third was to my brother, Thomas, the only family member I truly trusted. I need help, I had told each of them, and I need complete secrecy. The next day, I had gone to breakfast with Victoria. She had suggested meeting at the Harbor Cafe, a trendy spot downtown where the wives of wealthy men went to be seen. I had arrived early, ordered green tea, and waited. Victoria had walked in 15 minutes late, pushing a designer stroller. She had looked radiant, in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair had been perfectly styled. Her makeup had been flawless. "Isabelle," she had said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Thank you so much for meeting me. I know this is awkward." "Not at all," I had replied, smiling. "We need to talk about Christopher's future." She had seemed surprised by my warmth. She had probably expected tears or anger or cold silence. Instead, I had ordered her favorite pastries and asked about the baby. "He's wonderful," she had gushed. "He has Alexander's eyes. Everyone says so." I had nodded, hiding my thoughts behind my teacup. Christopher had brown eyes. Alexander's eyes were blue. But people saw what they expected to see. "I want you to know," Victoria had continued, lowering her voice, "that I never meant for this to happen. Alexander and I. It just sort of developed. We were working such long hours together. And we connected in ways that..." She had trailed off, looking guilty but also triumphant. "I understand," I had said. "These things happen. You're being so mature about this," she had said. "I told Alexander you would be. You're not like other women. You're evolved." I had smiled wider. I try to be rational. Emotions cloud judgment. Victoria had relaxed then, leaning back in her chair. "Exactly. And honestly, Isabelle, I think this could work out well for everyone. Alexander can support Christopher financially, and you and I can be civil. Maybe even friends. Maybe." I had agreed. We had talked for another hour. She had told me about her plans to buy a house in the suburbs, something with a yard for Christopher. She had mentioned that Alexander had promised to help with the down payment. She had talked about wanting another baby in a few years, saying that Christopher needed a sibling. I had listened to every word. I had taken mental notes. And I had hated myself a little for how easily I could pretend to be kind to the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. As we were leaving, Victoria had touched my arm. "Thank you for being so understanding. I was worried you would make this difficult. Life is too short for unnecessary drama," I had said. She had hugged me goodbye, and I had let her. Then I had walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and allowed myself 5 minutes to feel the full weight of my rage and hurt. Then I had called Patricia Montgomery. "I need you to find out everything about Victoria Hayes," I had told her. "Everything. Where she's really from. Who the father of her baby actually is. And most importantly, I need to know what she and my husband are really planning." Patricia Montgomery had been worth every dollar I paid her. Within 2 weeks, she had compiled a file that made my blood run cold and my resolve strengthen. Victoria Hayes wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Victoria Harrison. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio, daughter of a factory worker and a waitress. She had put herself through community college, then state university. Nothing wrong with any of that. But the story she had told Alexander about being from old money, about her father being a diplomat, about her private school education, all lies. She had been married before, briefly, 5 years ago, to a man named Kyle Patterson. The marriage had lasted 11 months before Kyle had filed for divorce, citing fraud. He had accused Victoria of manipulating him into marriage by faking a pregnancy. Patricia had tracked Kyle down. He had been reluctant to talk at first, but when Patricia had explained that another woman might be in a similar situation, he had opened up. She's a con artist. He had told Patricia over the phone. Patricia had recorded the conversation. She targets successful men, gets them to trust her. Then, she creates some kind of crisis that requires their support. With me, it was a fake pregnancy and then a miscarriage, after I had already changed my will to include her. She walked away with $30,000 in our settlement. The baby, Patricia had discovered through her sources at the hospital, was not Christopher at all. His real name was Ryan Harrison, and he was Victoria's nephew. Her sister, Kelly, had been struggling with addiction and had temporarily given up custody. Victoria had seen an opportunity, but the most damaging information Patricia had uncovered was about the real plan. Alexander and Victoria weren't just having an affair. They were planning to force me out of Knight Industries entirely. Victoria had been recording conversations, gathering information, building a case to paint me as unstable. The plan was to have Alexander divorce me, claim I was emotionally unfit, and use Victoria's supposed pregnancy as evidence of my inability to provide him with heirs. Then, with me out of the picture, Victoria would marry Alexander and gain access to the company I had helped build. Because that was the thing everyone seemed to forget. Knight Industries hadn't started with Alexander. It had started with my money. I had met Alexander Knight 7 years ago at a business conference in Chicago. I had been 25, freshly graduated from Harvard Business School, and newly in possession of a $12 million inheritance from my grandmother. My parents had died when I was young, and my grandmother had raised me. She had been a shrewd investor, and she had taught me everything she knew. Alexander had been 28, charming, ambitious, and broke. He had had ideas, brilliant ideas about technology and real estate investment, but he had had no capital to execute them. We had talked for hours that first night, about business, about dreams, about building something meaningful. He had made me laugh. He had listened to my ideas and treated them with respect. He had looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in the world. 6 months later, we were married. 6 months after that, we had founded Knight Industries, with my inheritance, as the primary investment. Alexander had insisted on putting the company solely in his name for tax purposes and because investors take male CEOs more seriously. I had been young and in love and stupidly trusting. I had agreed. Over the years, Knight Industries had grown. My strategies, my connections, my business sense had helped turn that initial investment into a company worth over $200 million. But on paper, I owned nothing. I was listed as a consultant, paid a modest salary, with no official stake in the company. Alexander's lawyers had been very careful about that. When I had discovered the truth about Victoria, my first instinct had been to rage, to confront, to destroy everything immediately. But then I had taken a breath and thought about what my grandmother would have done. She would have been strategic. She would have gathered evidence. She would have planned carefully. And she would have made sure that when she struck, the blow would be final. So that's what I had done. Kenneth Walsh, my lawyer, had quietly begun building a case. He had found the original business documents showing my initial investment. He had tracked down witnesses from those early days who could testify to my role in the company's formation. He had identified loopholes in the corporate structure that Alexander had never bothered to close. You have a strong case, Kenneth had told me during one of our secret meetings, but it will be messy, public. It could take years. I don't want years, I had said. I want one perfect moment. Kenneth had smiled. Then we need to be creative. The Businessman of the Year Gala had been the perfect opportunity. Kenneth and I had planned it down to the minute. The award itself had been legitimate. Alexander's company had performed exceptionally well that year, thanks largely to a deal I had personally brokered with a manufacturing firm in Taiwan. But the timing of the announcement, the guest list, the media presence I had influenced all of it through careful manipulation and well-placed donations to the awarding organization. I had wanted Alexander at his highest point when he fell. I had wanted the world watching. For 3 months, I had been the perfect wife. I had supported his affair with Victoria publicly. I had made sympathetic comments to friends about complicated situations and modern families. I had even helped Victoria shop for baby clothes, smiling through gritted teeth while she cooed over tiny outfits. All the while, I had been moving pieces into place. Patricia had found the baby's real mother, Kelly Harrison, Kelly had been living in a rehabilitation facility, trying to get clean. She had been devastated to learn that her sister had taken her son and was passing him off as someone else's child. Patricia had helped Kelly get legal counsel. Together, they had petitioned for custody and had prepared evidence of Victoria's fraud. Kenneth had worked with forensic accountants to trace every dollar of my initial investment in Knight Industries. He had found emails, contracts, and witness testimonies that proved my role in founding the company. He had also discovered that Alexander had been systematically siphoning money into offshore accounts, likely planning to hide assets before divorcing me. Thomas, my brother, had used his connections in journalism to plant strategic stories. Nothing too obvious, just subtle pieces about corporate fraud, about women being cheated out of business ownership, about the importance of documentation in partnerships. We were building a narrative, creating a context for what was about to happen, and I had gathered my own evidence. I had kept the DNA test results I found. I had made copies of Alexander's files, his emails, his phone records. I had documented every lie, every deception, every moment of betrayal. But the piece de resistance, the thing that would make this truly devastating, had come from an unexpected source. Victoria herself had handed me the weapon I needed. 2 weeks before the gala, Victoria had come to me with a proposal. We had met at my house, the penthouse Alexander and I shared downtown. She had brought Christopher, using the baby as a prop the way she always did. "I've been thinking," she had said, settling onto my white sofa with Christopher in her lap, "about the future, about what's best for everyone." I had poured her tea and waited. I had learned that Victoria loved to talk, loved to reveal her plans, as long as she thought she was in control. "Alexander and I have been discussing the company's future," she had continued, "and we both think it would be better if we had a cleaner structure. Less complicated." "What do you mean?" I had asked, already knowing exactly what she meant. "Well, you're listed as a consultant, but you don't really have an active role anymore," she had said. "Alexander mentioned you've been stepping back, focusing on other things." She had gestured vaguely, as if my interests were insignificant hobbies. "I see," I had said. "So we were thinking, and this is just a suggestion, that maybe it would be simpler if you signed over your consulting contract. Alexander could buy you out, give you a fair settlement, and you could pursue your own interests without being tied to the company." I had pretended to consider this. "How much would this settlement be?" Victoria had smiled. Alexander was thinking around $2 million. $2 million. For a company worth over $200 million. For a company I had funded and helped build. "That's very generous," I had said flatly. Victoria hadn't caught my sarcasm. "We thought so. And honestly, Isabelle, wouldn't it be better for you to make a clean break? You're still young. You could start fresh, maybe find someone new. This way, you don't have to be reminded every day of everything." She had meant the affair, the baby, the betrayal. She had been offering me money to disappear quietly, to stop being an inconvenience in her plan to take over my life. "Can I think about it?" I had asked. "Of course," Victoria had said, "but Alexander hopes to have everything finalized by the end of the month, before the Businessman of the Year gala. He wants to start the new year with a clean slate." After she left, I had sat in my living room for a long time, looking out at the city skyline. Alexander wanted to finalize our divorce before the gala. He wanted to parade Victoria and his son in front of everyone while I quietly disappeared with my pittance of a settlement. I had called Kenneth immediately. "They're trying to push me out before the gala," I had told him. "Don't sign anything," Kenneth had said. "We're almost ready. Just hold on a little longer." So I had held on. I had played along. I had even met with Alexander's lawyers and pretended to seriously consider their offer. I had asked questions, requested documentation, delayed with bureaucratic excuses, and all the while, I had been preparing my counterstrike. 8. The morning of the gala, I had woken up at 5 a.m. Alexander had still been asleep beside me, snoring softly. I had looked at him in the gray dawn light, this man I had loved and trusted and built a life with, and felt nothing but cold determination. I had gotten up quietly and gone to my office, the small room at the end of the hall that Alexander called my hobby space. There, I had reviewed everything one final time. The DNA test results showing Christopher wasn't Alexander's son. Kelly Harrison's custody petition and evidence that Christopher was actually her son, Ryan. Victoria's real identity and history of fraud. The corporate documents proving my role in founding Knight Industries. Alexander's financial records showing his attempt to hide assets. The recording of Victoria offering me $2 million to disappear quietly. Everything was ready. I had dressed carefully that evening. I had chosen a red dress, bold, confident, unforgettable. I had worn the diamond earrings Alexander had given me for our 5th anniversary, back when I had still believed in us. I had done my makeup flawlessly, making sure my eyes were bright and clear, showing no hint of the sleepless nights I had endured. Alexander had kissed my cheek before we left. "You look beautiful," he had said. "Thank you," I had replied, and meant it. I wanted to look beautiful. I wanted to look powerful. I wanted everyone to remember exactly how I looked on the night I reclaimed my life. The gala had been everything I had expected. The ballroom had been magnificent, filled with the city's elite. I had smiled and chatted and played my role perfectly. I had watched Alexander accept his award with manufactured pride. And then, exactly 47 minutes into his acceptance speech, I had made my move. "That child is not my husband's son," I had said into the microphone, my words echoing through the silent ballroom. The room had exploded in chaos. Cameras had flashed. People had gasped. Victoria had stood up, clutching Christopher, her face white with shock and fury. "You're lying," she had said, her voice shaking. "You're just a bitter, jealous woman who can't accept that Alexander moved on." I had smiled. "Am I? Alexander, why don't you tell everyone about the DNA test you took 2 weeks before I found the results? The one that proved this baby isn't yours." Alexander's face had drained of color. How did I find it?" I had finished for him. "Because I'm not as blind or as stupid as you thought I was." I had pulled out my phone and projected an image onto the large screen behind the podium, the same screen that had just been showing photos of Alexander's business achievements. The DNA test results had appeared, crisp and clear, showing 0% probability of paternity. The crowd had erupted in fresh whispers. "But here's the interesting part," I had continued, my voice carrying over the noise. "Alexander knew this baby wasn't his. Yet he continued to claim paternity. Why would he do that? Why would a successful businessman deliberately take on financial responsibility for another man's child?" I had looked at Victoria then. Unless it wasn't about the baby at all, unless it was about something else entirely. Victoria had shaken her head. "You're insane, Alexander. Do something." But Alexander had just stood there, frozen. I had pulled up another image. This is Victoria Hayes. Or should I say, Victoria Harrison, born in Middletown, Ohio, married and divorced at 23. Her ex-husband accused her of faking a pregnancy to manipulate him into marriage. Victoria had started backing toward the exit, but hotel security had blocked her path. I had arranged that too. "And this," I had continued, pulling up another photo, "is Kelly Harrison, Victoria's sister. The real mother of the baby Victoria has been passing off as Alexander's son. His actual name is Ryan. Kelly is currently in rehabilitation and has filed for custody of her child. Child Protective Services is waiting outside to take Ryan into temporary care until this matter is resolved." The crowd had been completely silent now, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. "But wait," I had said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "There's more." I had pulled up the next document, the original incorporation papers for Knight Industries. 7 years ago, I invested $12 million of my inheritance into a startup company, I had said. That company became Knight Industries. My money, my initial capital, my connections that led to our first major deals. But somehow, my name doesn't appear anywhere on the corporate documents as a founder or owner. I had turned to Alexander. "Would you like to explain to everyone how that happened? How the company I funded became solely yours?" Alexander had finally found his voice. We agreed that you would handle the paperwork." I had interrupted. "I trusted you. And you betrayed that trust to cut me out of my own company." I had pulled up more documents, emails, contracts, financial records. "For the past 3 months, I've been working with forensic accountants and lawyers. We've documented everything. The offshore accounts you've been hiding, the money you've been moving to prepare for divorcing me, the systematic way you've tried to erase my contributions to this company." Kenneth had appeared at the edge of the stage, holding a folder. I had introduced him to the crowd. "This is Kenneth Walsh, my attorney. He has legal documents showing my ownership stake in Knight Industries, documents that Alexander's lawyers somehow forgot to file properly. We'll be going to court to reclaim what's rightfully mine. Alexander had stepped toward me, his hands raised. Isabelle, please. We can talk about this privately. You're embarrassed and angry, I understand. But embarrassed? I had repeated, my voice sharp. No, Alexander. I'm not embarrassed. You should be embarrassed. You're the one who had an affair with a con artist. You're the one who lied about a child's paternity. You're the one who tried to steal from your own wife. I had turned back to the crowd. For 3 months, I've watched Victoria Hayes parade around with a baby that doesn't belong to my husband. I've listened to pitying comments about my inability to give him children. I've stood by while everyone assumed I was weak, or desperate, or pathetically loyal. I had let my voice rise, let my anger show through. But I wasn't any of those things. I was gathering evidence. I was building a case. I was preparing to take back everything that belongs to me. The crowd had started applauding, slowly at first, then building to a thunderous ovation. These were business people, after all. They understood strategy. They respected a well-executed plan. Victoria had tried to run then, still holding Christopher. But 2 women from Child Protective Services had intercepted her at the door. One of them had gently taken the baby from her arms, while the other had asked her to come with them for questioning. This is kidnapping, Victoria had screamed. That's my baby. He's your nephew, I had corrected calmly. And his mother wants him back. Security had escorted Victoria out, her protests echoing through the ballroom even as the doors closed behind her. Alexander had slumped into a chair on the stage, his head in his hands. The cameras had continued flashing. A reporter from the business channel had rushed forward with a microphone. I had held up my hand. I'll make one statement, and then I'm done for the evening. Knight Industries was built on deception and stolen dreams. Tomorrow, I'm filing suit to reclaim my ownership stake. I'm also filing for divorce. And I'm announcing the formation of my own investment firm, Montgomery Capital, named after my grandmother who taught me never to trust someone just because you love them. I had looked directly at Alexander then. You wanted to give me $2 million to disappear. I'm going to take $200 million instead. See you in court. The crowd had erupted again. Some people had looked shocked. Others had looked impressed. A few women had actually cheered. I had walked off that stage with my head high, my heels clicking against the marble floor with purpose. Kenneth had met me at the bottom of the stairs with a bottle of water and a proud smile. That was perfect, he had said. It's only the beginning, I had replied. Outside, the cool night air had hit my face like a blessing. I had taken a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in months. The revenge had been sweet, yes. But more than that, it had been necessary. It had been just. My phone had buzzed with texts. Thomas congratulating me. Patricia confirming that Victoria had been taken into custody for questioning about child welfare fraud. Friends expressing shock and support. But the text that had mattered most had been from Kelly Harrison. Thank you for helping me get my son back. I'll never forget what you did. I had gotten into my car, not the Tesla that Alexander had bought me, but the vintage Mercedes I had purchased with my own money and driven away from the hotel. In the rearview mirror, I could see reporters clustered around the entrance, their cameras still flashing, everyone desperate for more information about the scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. But I was done being part of Alexander Knight's story. It was time to write my own. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel suite. I had known better than to go back to the penthouse I shared with Alexander. Kenneth had arranged for me to stay at the Riverside Hotel under a pseudonym, giving me space to breathe and plan my next moves. I ordered room service, fresh coffee, eggs, Benedict, and strawberries and sat by the window, looking out at the river. The water flowed steadily, indifferent to human drama. I found that comforting. My phone had been ringing constantly since 6 a.m. I had silenced it, but I could see the notifications piling up. 37 missed calls, 82 text messages, 15 voicemails. I ignored them all and opened my laptop instead. The news had spread faster than I had anticipated. Every major business publication had covered the story. Tech mogul's secret revealed. DNA test exposes elaborate fraud. Read one headline. Billionaire's wife takes revenge in spectacular public takedown. Read another. But the story that caught my attention was from a smaller, independent business journal. The headline read, Isabelle Knight, the woman who built an empire and got written out of history. The article detailed my role in founding Knight Industries. It quoted former employees who remembered my contributions. It analyzed the corporate structure and highlighted how unusual it was for a company's primary investor to have no official ownership stake. The reporter had done her homework. She had found my Harvard thesis on sustainable technology investment. She had interviewed my professors, who praised my brilliant strategic mind. She had painted a picture of a talented woman whose achievements had been systematically erased by a man she had trusted. At the end of the article, she had written, "The question isn't whether Isabelle Knight deserves recognition for her role in Knight Industries. The question is how many other women have similar stories that never get told." I had smiled reading that. The narrative was shifting. I was no longer the scorned wife. I was the brilliant businesswoman who had been cheated. Kenneth called at 9 o'clock. I answered. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. "Have you seen the news?" "I have. Alexander's lawyers are trying to do damage control. They're claiming you staged the whole thing for attention. They're saying the DNA test is fake. Let them claim whatever they want," I said. "We have the original test, taken by their own doctor. We have Victoria's real identity. We have Kelly Harrison ready to testify. And most importantly, we have public opinion on our side." "The court of public opinion is already convicted him," Kenneth agreed. "But we still need to handle the legal side. Are you ready?" I took a sip of coffee. "I've been ready for 3 months." Kenneth and I spent the next week locked in strategy sessions. We met in his office downtown, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The legal case was complex. Alexander's lawyers were good, expensive, and ruthless. They would fight every step of the way. But we had something they didn't: the truth, and documentation to prove it. "The key is the initial investment," Kenneth explained, spreading documents across his conference table. "Your grandmother's estate records show exactly how much you inherited and when. Bank records show the transfer of that money into Knight Industries accounts. Email correspondence from that time period shows you discussing business strategy with Alexander. But the corporate documents don't list me as a founder," I said. "That's where it gets interesting," Kenneth said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Alexander's lawyers argue that you made a gift of that money to him, not an investment. But we found something they don't know about." He pulled out a yellowed piece of paper. "This is the original partnership agreement you and Alexander wrote before Knight Industries was officially incorporated. It's handwritten, signed by both of you. It explicitly states that you're equal partners in the venture." I stared at the document. I had forgotten about that. We had written it on a Saturday afternoon in our first apartment, sitting on the floor with a bottle of wine, dreaming about our future. "Where did you find this?" "In a box of old files in your storage unit," Kenneth said. "You gave me the access code, remember? I've been going through everything you saved, from the early days." I touched the paper gently. My handwriting from 7 years ago looked younger, more naive. But the words were clear. "Equal partners in all business ventures." "This changes everything," Kenneth said. "With this document, we can prove that Alexander violated your partnership agreement by incorporating the company solely in his name. We can argue fraud, breach of contract, and fiduciary duty. How long will the case take? Could be 6 months. Could be 2 years. Depends on how hard Alexander wants to fight." "He'll fight," I said. "His ego won't let him back down quietly." Kenneth nodded. "Probably. But here's the thing. Every day this case drags on, it costs him. Reputation damage, legal fees, business deals falling through because partners don't want to be associated with scandal. Time is actually on our side." He was right. Already, I had heard through my network that several major investors were reconsidering their relationships with Knight Industries. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Alexander's appearance at business conferences had been canceled. The court of public opinion was doing exactly what I had hoped it would do. While Kenneth handled the legal strategy, I focused on building my new company, Montgomery Capital. I had rented office space in the Riverside Tower, 20 floors below where Alexander and I used to work together. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. I was literally beneath him now, but I would rise. My brother Thomas had agreed to join me as a partner. He had been working in venture capital for years and had valuable connections. Together, we started recruiting a small team, talented people who were tired of working in companies where their contributions weren't recognized. Our first hire was Amanda Chen, a brilliant financial analyst who had resigned from Knight Industries the day after the gala. She had walked into my temporary office unannounced and handed me her resume. "I've been watching how Alexander treated you for years," she had said bluntly. I always knew something was wrong. When you exposed him, I realized I didn't want to work for someone who could betray his own wife. I'd rather work for the wife. I had hired her on the spot. More people had followed. A marketing director who had pitched ideas to Alexander that he had stolen and presented as his own. A project manager who had been passed over for promotion 3 times despite excellent performance. A software developer who had created Knight Industries' most successful product but had never received proper credit. They all had similar stories. They all had been underestimated, overlooked, or undermined. We became a company of people who understood what it felt like to be invisible despite being essential. What's our mission? Thomas asked during one of our planning meetings. I thought about it. We invest in overlooked opportunities. Companies that traditional investors ignore. Founders who don't fit the typical profile. We look for brilliance in unexpected places. Amanda nodded. I like that. We're the anti-establishment establishment. We worked 16-hour days, building our investment strategy, reaching out to potential clients, creating a brand identity. The work was exhausting but energizing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that truly belonged to me. And then, 3 weeks after the gala, I received an unexpected visitor. Victoria Hayes showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon. My assistant had called to warn me. There's a woman here to see you. She says her name is Victoria and that it's urgent. I had been tempted to refuse. But curiosity got the better of me. Send her in, I had said. Victoria had looked different from the polished woman I had known. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She wore no makeup. She looked tired and defeated. Thank you for seeing me, she said quietly, sitting in the chair across from my desk. I didn't respond. I just waited. I wanted to apologize, she continued. For everything. You didn't deserve any of what I did to you. No, I agreed. I didn't. I was desperate, she said, her voice breaking slightly. My sister was in trouble. Ryan Christopher needed a stable home. I thought if I could get Alexander to believe the baby was his, I could secure enough money to take care of both of them. So you built an elaborate lie, I said. You seduced my husband. You pretended to be someone you weren't. You tried to steal my company. I know, she whispered. I know it was wrong. But I didn't see another way. I leaned forward. There are always other ways, Victoria. Legal ways. Honest ways. You could have asked for help. You could have been truthful about your situation. Would you have helped me if I had asked? The question hung in the air. I thought about it honestly. I don't know, I admitted. Probably not. But that doesn't excuse what you did. Victoria nodded. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that I'm going to face the consequences of my choices. What happened to Ryan? I asked. He's with my sister. Kelly got out of rehab early because of the custody situation. She's doing better. Social services is monitoring her. But she has him back. That's good, I said. And I meant it. Whatever Victoria had done, the baby deserved to be with his mother. Victoria stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. Can I ask you something? You can ask. When did you know? When did you figure out it was all a lie? I smiled slightly. I found the DNA test 3 months before the gala, but I suspected something was wrong long before that. You made mistakes, Victoria. Small ones. But I was paying attention. What kind of mistakes? You claimed to love classical music, but you didn't know the difference between Bach and Beethoven. You said you grew up in Connecticut, but you didn't recognize the name of the most famous prep school there. You talked about your father being a diplomat, but you couldn't name a single embassy he had worked at. I stood and walked to the window. I grew up being taught to notice details, to verify information, to trust my instincts. When my instincts told me something was wrong with you, I started paying closer attention. Victoria looked stunned. You knew even before the DNA test. I suspected. The DNA test just confirmed it. She shook her head slowly. I underestimated you. Everyone does, I said. That's their mistake. After Victoria left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, thinking about her apology. Part of me wanted to accept it, to let go of the anger and move forward. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed and humiliated, wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. And maybe that was okay. Thomas knocked and entered without waiting for permission. That was his way. I just saw Victoria Hayes leaving, he said. What did she want? To apologize. Thomas snorted. Too little, too late. Maybe, I said. But at least she tried. Have you heard from Alexander? I shook my head. Not directly. His lawyers keep sending letters. Threats, mostly. Claims that I'm destroying his reputation unfairly. His reputation destroyed itself, Thomas said. You just made sure everyone knew about it. He sat down across from me, studying my face. How are you really doing, Belle? And don't give me the strong and confident answer. I'm your brother. I can tell when you're hurting. I felt my throat tighten. I had been holding everything together so well, staying focused on business and legal strategies. But Thomas's question cracked something open. I'm angry, I admitted. I'm hurt. I'm disappointed. I thought I knew him. I thought we had built something real together. And it turned out I was just a convenient source of funding. He's an idiot, Thomas said. He had something precious, and he threw it away for what? A con artist and her fake baby. He deserves everything that's coming to him. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just walked away quietly, I said. Taken whatever settlement he offered and started fresh without all this publicity. You wonder that. For about 5 seconds, I admitted. Then I remember how he made me feel. Small, invisible, replaceable. And I know I did the right thing. Thomas nodded. You did. And not just for yourself. You did it for every woman who's been erased from her own success story. You showed that fighting back is possible. The court case began in late October, 4 months after the gala. The courthouse was a posing building downtown. All marble columns and serious faces. Reporters lined the steps, cameras ready to capture every moment. I wore a navy suit, professional, authoritative, unshakable. Alexander arrived separately with his legal team. He avoided looking at me. Good. I didn't want his guilt or his excuses. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Townsend. She had a reputation for being tough but fair. She had no patience for corporate games or emotional manipulation. I've reviewed the preliminary documents, Judge Townsend said after we were all seated. This is clearly a complex case involving corporate formation, partnership agreements, and significant financial assets. We'll proceed methodically. Alexander's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Burke, stood. Your Honor, my client maintains that Miss Knight's investment was a gift, not a business contribution. There is no valid partnership agreement. Kenneth stood. Your Honor, we have documentation proving otherwise, including an original handwritten partnership agreement signed by both parties. Judge Townsend raised an eyebrow. I'd like to see that document. Kenneth presented it. The judge examined it carefully, then looked at Alexander. Mr. Knight, is this your signature? Alexander hesitated. Yes. But and did you sign this document willingly? Yes. But we wrote it before we were even married. It wasn't legally binding. It was just romantic. We were talking about our future. Talking about your future as equal partners, Judge Townsend said dryly. That sounds quite binding to me. Harrison Burke tried to recover. Your Honor, that document was never formalized. The actual corporate documents for Knight Industries make no mention of Miss Knight as a founder or partner. Yes, Judge Townsend said. I'm quite curious about that discrepancy. Mr. Knight, why didn't you honor this agreement when you incorporated the company? Alexander looked at his lawyers. Harrison whispered something to him. My lawyers advised me that it would be cleaner to have a single owner for tax and liability purposes. I intended to add Isabelle later, but we never got around to it. Never got around to it, Judge Townsend repeated. In 7 years? The courtroom was silent. Kenneth stood again. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Knight deliberately excluded Miss Knight from corporate documents in order to maintain sole control of the company. We have emails showing he consulted with lawyers about how to structure the company to minimize her ownership claims. I'd like to see those emails, Judge Townsend said. The first day of trial lasted 6 hours. By the end, it was clear that Alexander's position was weak. The evidence against him was overwhelming. But I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, the case dominated my life. There were depositions, document reviews, expert testimony from accountants and corporate lawyers. Kenneth and his team were brilliant. They methodically built a case showing that Knight Industries existed only because of my initial investment. They proved that I had been actively involved in the company's strategic decisions for years. They demonstrated that Alexander had systematically excluded me from official recognition while benefiting from my contributions. Alexander's lawyers fought back hard. They tried to paint me as a bitter ex-wife making false claims. They argued that my investment had been a personal gift to my husband, not a business transaction. They brought in character witnesses who testified about how devoted I had seemed to Alexander, how I had never complained about not being listed as a co-founder. That's because I trusted him. I testified when my turn came. I believed that we were partners in every sense. I didn't think I needed my name on documents because I thought we were building something together. I was naive. Harrison Burke had cross-examined me aggressively. Miss Knight, isn't it true that you never asked to be listed as a co-founder? I didn't think I needed to ask. We had an agreement. An agreement written on a piece of notebook paper over wine. Hardly a professional business contract. It was written in good faith between two people who loved each other. I had said, looking directly at the jury. He betrayed that faith. The jury had been made up of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from their 20s to their 60s. I watched their faces throughout the trial. Some seemed sympathetic. Others seemed skeptical. All of them seemed engaged. The turning point came when Kenneth called a witness I hadn't expected. James Morrison, one of Knight Industries' earliest investors. James was a venture capitalist in his 70s who had put money into the company during its first year. He had known both Alexander and me from the beginning. Mr. Morrison, Kenneth asked, can you describe your first meeting with Alexander Knight? I met Alexander at a conference, James said. He pitched me his ideas for the company. They were interesting but half-baked. I told him he needed more than ideas. He needed capital, connections, and business strategy. What happened next? The next time I saw him, he brought Isabelle. She had all 3 things I had mentioned. She had funding from her inheritance. She had connections from her family and her education. And she had a brilliant strategic mind. After talking with her for an hour, I agreed to invest not because of Alexander, but because of Isabelle. The courtroom had buzzed with whispers. Did you ever discuss with Alexander who the real driving force behind Knight Industries was? James nodded. Several times. I told him privately that he was lucky to have Isabelle, that she was the real genius behind the operation. He would laugh it off, but I could tell it bothered him. Why do you think it bothered him? Ego, James said bluntly. Alexander wanted to be seen as the brilliant entrepreneur. He didn't want to share credit with his wife. After James Morrison's testimony, the momentum shifted decisively in my favor. More witnesses came forward, each one adding weight to my case. Former employees testified about my role in major business decisions. Business partners confirmed that they had worked primarily with me on key deals. Even some of Alexander's own friends admitted, under oath, that they had always known I was the brains behind Knight Industries. Alexander's lawyers tried to discredit the witnesses, but the pattern was too clear. Everyone who had worked closely with the company in its early days recognized my contributions. The final blow came when Kenneth presented evidence of Alexander's offshore accounts and his plan to hide assets before divorcing me. Your Honor, Kenneth said, Mr. Knight has systematically transferred over $50 million to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland over the past year. These transfers coincide with the timeline of his affair with Miss Hayes and his plan to divorce Miss Knight. Judge Townsend looked at Alexander coldly. Mr. Knight, do you deny making these transfers? Alexander's face had gone red. I was diversifying my assets. That's good business practice. Without informing your wife, your supposed partner. We were having marital difficulties, so you were hiding money. Judge Townsend interrupted. While planning to offer her a settlement of $2 million for a company she helped create that's worth over $200 million. Does that seem fair to you, Mr. Knight? Alexander had no good answer. The trial concluded in January, 8 months after the gala. Judge Townsend promised a ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were the longest of my life. I threw myself into work, building Montgomery Capital into a serious competitor in the investment space. We closed our first major deal, a $20 million investment in a clean energy startup founded by a single mother with a PhD in environmental engineering, the kind of founder traditional firms would overlook. I spent time with Thomas, rediscovering the sibling relationship I had neglected during my years with Alexander. We had dinner together twice a week, talking about everything except the trial. I went to therapy. I had resisted the idea at first, But Kenneth had insisted. "You're going through a major trauma," he had said. "You need professional support." He had been right. Talking to Dr. Rachel Hayes, no relation to Victoria, thankfully, helped me process the betrayal, the anger, the grief of losing the life I had thought I was building. "Your mourning, Doctor," Hayes had told me. "Not just your marriage, but your innocence, your trust, your belief that love is enough." "Is it getting better?" I had asked. "What do you think?" I had considered the question honestly. Some days are harder than others. But I can breathe again. I can see a future that doesn't include him. That's progress. That's significant progress, she had agreed. Judge Townsend delivered her ruling on a cold February morning. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Reporters lined the walls. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Kenneth and his team. My hands folded calmly in my lap despite the storm of nerves in my chest. Alexander sat across the aisle, looking tired. He had aged in the past 8 months. Gray had appeared at his temples. Lines had deepened around his eyes. "Good." Judge Townsend entered. We all stood. "Please be seated," she said. She opened a folder and began to read. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in the case of Knight versus Knight. This is a complex matter involving corporate formation, partnership agreements, and significant financial assets." She paused, looking at both of us. "However, at its core, this case is quite simple. It is about a woman who invested her inheritance, her intelligence, and her trust in a business venture with a man she loved. And it is about that man systematically excluding her from recognition and ownership of the company she helped create." My heart pounded. The evidence is overwhelming that Miss Knight was an equal partner in founding Knight Industries. The original partnership agreement, while informal, clearly states the intention of both parties. The corporate documents that excluded her were created without her knowledge or informed consent. The testimony of numerous witnesses confirms her active role in the company's success. Judge Townsend looked at Alexander. "Mr. Knight, you betrayed not only your marriage vows but also your business partnership. You benefited from Miss Knight's contributions while denying her rightful recognition." She looked back at her papers. "Therefore, I rule as follows. Knight Industries shall be divided equally between Alexander Knight and Isabelle Knight, reflecting their status as co-founders and equal partners. Miss Knight is entitled to 50% ownership of all company assets, stocks, and intellectual property." The courtroom erupted. I felt Kenneth squeeze my shoulder. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not yet." Judge Townsend continued over the noise. "Additionally, I find that Mr. Knight acted in bad faith by attempting to hide assets, and by offering Miss Knight a grossly inadequate settlement. Therefore, he shall be responsible for all legal fees in this matter, and shall pay Miss Knight $5 million in damages for emotional distress and reputational harm." She banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." People rushed toward me, Kenneth, Thomas, Amanda, reporters, supporters. But I just sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. I had won. Not just in court. I had won back my dignity, my future, my sense of self. The weeks following the verdict were a blur of activity. Alexander's lawyers tried to appeal, but Judge Townsend's ruling was airtight. Eventually, they advised him to settle rather than drag things out further. The settlement negotiations were tense. Alexander didn't want to give up control of Knight Industries. But he had no choice. The court had ruled, and public opinion had turned decisively against him. We met one final time to sign the papers. Not in a courthouse, but in a conference room at Kenneth's office. Alexander arrived looking defeated. He barely made eye contact with me. "Hello, Alexander," I said calmly. "Isabelle." We sat across from each other with lawyers on either side. Kenneth presented the documents. I would receive 50% ownership of Knight Industries plus $5 million in damages. Alexander would retain operational control of the company. But I would have equal say in major decisions and equal profit sharing. Additionally, I had insisted on one more clause. Alexander had to issue a public statement acknowledging my role in founding the company and apologizing for excluding me from recognition. "I won't do it," Alexander said when he saw that clause. "You've already humiliated me enough." "This isn't about humiliation," I said. "It's about truth. For 7 years, you let people believe you built this company alone. Now you'll tell them the truth, or what?" Or we go back to court, and I fight for full ownership. Judge Townsend made it clear she thinks you acted in bad faith. If I push, I might get everything. Alexander's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Alexander's jaw clenched. But after a long moment, he nodded. Fine. We signed the papers in silence. When it was done, Kenneth notarized everything and made copies. That's it, he said. You're now equal owners of Knight Industries. I stood and extended my hand to Alexander. He looked at it, surprised. What's this? A handshake, I said. We're business partners now. We don't have to like each other, but we should be professional. Alexander reluctantly shook my hand. His grip was weak, his palm sweaty. Congratulations on your victory, he said bitterly. It wasn't a victory, I replied. It was justice. There's a difference. I gathered my things and left. In the elevator, alone finally, I let myself smile. A week later, Alexander issued his public statement. He posted it on Knight Industries' website and read it at a press conference. I watched from my office, streaming the video on my laptop. I want to address recent events regarding my former wife, Isabelle Knight, and her role in Knight Industries, Alexander said, reading stiffly from prepared remarks. When we founded this company 7 years ago, Isabelle provided the initial capital investment and significant strategic guidance. She was instrumental in securing our first major contracts and establishing our business model. He paused, clearly hating every word. However, due to my poor judgment and advice from lawyers who no longer work for this company, Isabelle was not properly recognized as a co-founder in our corporate documents. This was a serious error on my part. She deserved equal recognition for her contributions, and I failed to give her that recognition. Another pause. The assembled reporters were silent, cameras flashing. I also want to address the personal matter that became public at the Businessman of the Year gala last year. I was involved in an inappropriate relationship that violated my marriage vows and my professional ethics. I allowed myself to be deceived by someone who was not honest about her identity or intentions. This does not excuse my behavior. I take full responsibility for my choices and the harm they caused. He looked directly at the camera. Isabelle, if you're watching this, I want you to know that I'm sorry. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty, respect, and recognition. I failed you in every way a husband and business partner could fail. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. I wondered if that was genuine emotion or just good acting. Going forward, Alexander continued, Knight Industries will be co-owned and co-operated by Isabelle Knight and myself. We will work together professionally to continue building the company we founded together. I hope that this public acknowledgement can begin to repair some of the damage I've caused. The press conference ended with reporters shouting questions, but Alexander didn't answer any of them. He simply walked off the stage. My phone rang immediately. It was Thomas. Did you watch? He asked. I did. How do you feel? I thought about it. Satisfied. Not happy. Exactly. But satisfied. That's fair. The bastard deserved to eat crow publicly. Yes, I agreed. He did. 6 months after the verdict, I sold my shares in Knight Industries back to Alexander. It wasn't because I needed the money. Montgomery Capital was thriving. We had closed several major deals and had attracted significant outside investment. I had proven I could succeed on my own. But I didn't want to be tied to Alexander anymore. I didn't want to sit in board meetings with him. I didn't want to make decisions together. I didn't want any reminder of what we had once been. So I negotiated a buyout. Alexander paid me $120 million for my 50% stake. Kenneth structured it so I would receive payments over 5 years to minimize tax implications. Are you sure about this? Kenneth asked when we finalized the deal. You could keep your stake and continue building Knight Industries. I don't want to build his company anymore, I said. I want to build mine. The buyout gave me the capital I needed to expand Montgomery Capital significantly. We moved to larger offices. We hired more staff. We increased our investment portfolio. But more importantly, it gave me closure. The day the first buyout payment cleared my account, I took myself to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city. I ordered champagne and caviar and the chef's tasting menu. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, celebrating my freedom. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your success. You've earned it. Victoria. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to block the number, but another part of me, a part I was still learning to listen to, felt something almost like forgiveness, not for what she had done, but for the part she had played in forcing me to see the truth about my marriage. I texted back, "Thank you. I hope you and your sister are doing well." She responded immediately, "We are. Kelly has been sober for 9 months. Ryan is healthy and happy. I got a job as an administrative assistant. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest work." "That's good," I typed. "Take care of yourself." "You too. And Isabelle? I really am sorry." I put my phone away and finished my meal. Victoria's apology didn't change what had happened, but it reminded me that everyone has their own struggles, their own reasons for making terrible choices. I didn't have to forgive her, but I didn't have to carry hatred for her either. I could simply let it go and move forward. A year and a half after the gala, I was invited to speak at Harvard Business School. The invitation had come from Professor Christina Wells, who had taught my business strategy class when I was a student. She was organizing a panel discussion on women in entrepreneurship and wanted me to share my story. I almost declined. The whole experience with Alexander had been so public, so painful. Did I really want to relive it in front of a room full of students? But then I thought about the article I had read after the gala, the one that asked how many other women had similar stories that never got told. I wanted to tell my story, not for revenge or vindication, but so that other women might recognize the warning signs I had missed, so they might protect themselves better than I had, so they might know that fighting back was possible. I accepted the invitation. The panel was held in one of Harvard's grand lecture halls. 300 students attended. The other panelists were accomplished women entrepreneurs, a tech CEO, a hedge fund manager, and a medical device inventor. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the podium and looked out at all those young, eager faces. "My name is Isabelle Knight," I said, "and I'm going to tell you about the worst business mistake I ever made." I told them about meeting Alexander, about falling in love, about investing my inheritance without proper legal protection, about trusting someone just because I loved them. I was naive, I said. I thought love and partnership were the same thing. I thought if we were building a life together, we were naturally building a business together too. I didn't understand that without documentation, without legal protection, without my name on official documents, I owned nothing. I paused, letting that sink in. For 7 years, I helped build a company worth over $200 million. And on paper, I owned 0% of it. Because I trusted the wrong person. Because I didn't protect myself. Some students were taking notes furiously. Others just listened, wide-eyed. "But here's the thing I want you to understand," I continued. "When I discovered my husband's betrayal, I had 2 choices. I could walk away quietly, accept whatever he offered me, and disappear. Or I could fight." I smiled. I chose to fight. And it was the hardest, scariest, most uncomfortable thing I've ever done. It meant public humiliation. It meant exposing my private pain to the entire world. It meant months of legal battles and media scrutiny. But it was worth it, I said firmly. Because I didn't just win money or ownership shares. I won back my sense of self. I proved to myself that I was capable, that I was strong, that I deserved recognition for my contributions. After my speech, students lined up to ask questions. They asked about legal protection strategies, about recognizing red flags in business partnerships, about balancing personal and professional relationships. But the question that stayed with me came from a young woman near the back of the room. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Not the fight, but the relationship. Do you regret those 7 years with your husband?" I thought about it carefully. "That's a complicated question," I said finally. "I regret trusting him more than he deserved. I regret not protecting myself legally. I regret the pain he caused." I paused. "But I don't regret the lessons I learned. I don't regret discovering my own strength. I don't regret building a new company that reflects my values. If I had to go through all that pain to get to where I am now, yes, I would do it again." The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes. After the panel ended, she approached me. "Thank you," she said. "My boyfriend and I are starting a business together. Everyone tells me I should trust him, that we don't need formal contracts because we're in love. But after hearing your story, I'm going to insist on proper documentation." "Good," I said. "Love is wonderful. But business is business. Protect yourself." She hugged me impulsively, and I hugged her back. That moment, that connection with a stranger who might avoid the mistakes I made, that felt more meaningful than any victory in court. Because that was the real point of everything that had happened. Not revenge, not even justice. It was about transformation. About taking pain and turning it into wisdom. About using betrayal as fuel for growth. Alexander had tried to erase me from the story of Knight Industries. Instead, he had given me the motivation to write my own story, one where I was the protagonist, the hero, the architect of my own success. Montgomery Capital now managed over $300 million in investments. We had helped launch 15 successful startups. We had created hundreds of jobs. We had proven that investing in overlooked opportunities could be both profitable and meaningful. I had built something real, something mine, something that no one could take away, because this time, my name was on every document, every contract, every official record. 2 years after the gala, on a quiet Sunday morning, I stood in my new office, the entire top floor of the Riverside Tower, with windows overlooking the entire city, and thought about how far I had come. The pain of betrayal had faded to a dull ache, present but no longer overwhelming. I had learned to trust again, carefully, with my eyes open. I had learned to protect myself without becoming cynical. I had learned that strength didn't mean never being hurt. It meant surviving the hurt and becoming wiser for it. My phone buzzed. A text from Thomas, Sunday brunch. "I'm buying." I smiled and texted back, "I'm buying. I'm richer than you now." He sent back a laughing emoji. I grabbed my coat and headed for the elevator. On my way out, I passed the conference room where my team would gather tomorrow for our weekly strategy meeting. Through the glass walls, I could see the company motto we had painted on the wall. Invest in the overlooked. Believe in the underestimated. Build the future. Those words represented everything I had learned from my experience with Alexander. Every painful lesson crystallized into a business philosophy. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside and caught my reflection in the polished doors. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had discovered those DNA test results 2 years ago. Stronger, wiser, free. Alexander had tried to make me invisible. Instead, he had given me a reason to shine. And that, I thought, as the elevator descended toward the street level and the rest of my life, was the sweetest revenge of all. Not destroying him, but becoming more successful, more respected, more genuinely powerful than he had ever been. The doors opened. Sunlight streamed in. I stepped out into the morning, ready for whatever came next, knowing that this time, I was writing my own story, and no one could take that away from me.